Today is February 14th, 2022. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. My name is Charles Suter. Today I'm presenting part 3 of my series on happiness. This presentation focused on sources of happiness. My main message: happiness is a product of the right sources. For more information on this topic, I refer you to The Happiness Paradigm, a book written by Richard Eyre. People who seek happiness in the wrong places, from the wrong sources and for the wrong reasons, will not attain happiness, but instead will be frustrated and forced to settle for a lower baseline level of happiness. It doesn't have to be this way. There are known ways to boost the average set point of happiness to progressively higher levels if you focus your life on securing happiness from the right sources. Proposition 1. The happiness paradigm. The factors contributing to happiness change with your maturity. People start off early in life seeking happiness from control, ownership, and independence. But later in life, they will find that their happiness tends to stall. In order to increase your level of happiness, to become happier, you must shift from control, ownership, and independence to serendipity, stewardship, and synergicity. I will explain these terms shortly. What most people believe will bring the most happiness are effective up to a point, but eventually, happiness will simply plateau. If they continue to strive for happiness from these traditional sources too long. Now, wealth, relationships, power, and accomplishments will certainly bring one some measure of satisfaction and pleasure, but it doesn't last long because people soon become accustomed to what they have. To attain higher levels of happiness, one must move beyond what brings pleasure from these traditional sources of control, possessions, and independence. Proposition 2. The early sources of happiness. To help you remember what they are, just remember coin. C for control, O for ownership, and IN for independence. Control over your life decisions and outcomes. Ownership of economic resources and employment sources, which allow you for a guaranteed stream of income. Independence and ability to care for one's needs without depending upon others. Certainly, these are sure ways of happiness. However, these first sources of happiness, which come when a child has his basic needs met by his parents, eventually change as the child matures and wants to be able to control their own sources of happiness. It is extremely difficult to put mind over matter and be happy when your stomach is empty and you're not living in a warm, comfortable environment. But once these harsh conditions are overcome and some measure of control over the necessities of survival are attained, with enough provisions to allow some level of comfort and independence to make free choices, people can then begin to choose enjoyable activities and other sources that offer them a sufficient supply of satisfaction and pleasure. Here in Proposition 3, I now begin to discuss some of the more mature sources of happiness, which I label SSS to help you remember them. Serendipity. Serendipity is where you strive for one objective and achieve pleasant surprises while searching for something else. Stewardship. This is a collaborative responsibility for managing limited resources with other people. And synergicity, which is a product of two terms: synergy, where the whole is greater than the part, and synchronicity, which implies right timing and kind of a surprise ending. To become happier, you must shift your focus from control, possessions, and independence to the next higher sources of happiness, which is to use those same sources to attain greater ends. You must be willing to direct your freedom of choice to find some new, unexpected sources of meaningful pleasures. This can be accomplished by leaving the beaten path channeling into some side branches or small excursions away from home base in search of serendipity, stewardship, and synergicity, wherein something of greater value is created, often unexpectedly, and usually with the collaboration of others. Sometimes the best way to discover these new sources of meaningful pleasure is to experiment more often. The best way to find them is by taking small excursions from the norm, whose risk is not overwhelming, but yet with a high likelihood that you will find a surprise ending. Now, my main message of this presentation is that happiness is an emotional state of mind derived from the right sources. Happiness need not be elusive, as it is for many people who have reached the limits that control, possessions, and independence can provide. While happiness does come from all three traditional sources, that is, from control, possessions, and independence, they have their limits as sources of happiness. To become happier, you must shift your focus to less obvious sources, wherein you discover other hidden activities and associations offering new sources of meaningful pleasures. Since these new sources of happiness are not obvious, they must be discovered by moving off the beaten path with others of a like mind. You must be willing to explore new, unknown pathways, leading away from your comfort zone and into new, uncharted territories. Those places hinting of meaning, pleasure, and aligned with your personal interests and strengths. You do this, and you will find new levels of happiness. Well, that's all for now. Remember to stay positive. You'll be happier, healthier, and live longer.